The following program is brought to you by the Living Resources Center. Welcome to Solutions, Not Excuses with Dr. Michael Hurd. Dr. Hurd, a psychotherapist and author, will give you answers and insight into good mental health, politics, philosophy, and current events. Now, let's join our program and Dr. Hurd.
Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to let you listeners know that we have a repeat performance today by one Alexandra York, author of From the Fountainhead to the Future and other essays on art and excellence. She was on Solutions, Not Excuses last year, as many of you will remember. Alexandra, thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you for inviting me.
I have to tell you, your book, truthfully, is one that I can still be reading a year later and still be getting new things out of. It's just a fantastic book.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I think it'll be around for a long time to come. There's a passage in the book that kind of leads into the discussion I'd like to have with you today about, well, I think we're going to talk about movies, but I have a feeling we're going to get onto other things too about culture and art and psychology and responsibility. There's so many things we can talk about. But can I start with a quote from your book?
Sure.
Okay. On page 73, you write, "We have only to look at the sculpture from the apex of that seminal period of classical Greece to comprehend in an instant the unprecedented phenomenon of man at peace with himself, his body, and the physical world in which he lives. Man able to move, able to act, man unafraid and unashamed. Here, for the first time in human history, we encounter the combination of mental and physical health brought into perfect balance by a fusion of the real and the ideal, portraying human beauty in all its grandeur." Now, I know you're talking in that context essentially about art.
That's pretty good.
But let's apply this to movies for a minute, if we could. Is this one of the things you look for in movies? That's what I want to get at here today, because last time I know we talked a lot about art.
Well, it's one of the things I would love to find in movies.
Right.
And certainly it is something that we should especially look for, especially where children are concerned. And I'm very concerned about how movies and mass media are affecting young people. For example, we could take two movies that I'm sure everyone has seen, Gladiator and I never can remember whether it's Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger, or Crouching Dragon, Hidden Tiger, but you know which one I mean.
Yeah.
The Hong Kong movie. They're good examples. What you were just talking about is fusing the real with the ideal and showing the heroic for people to contemplate and possibly emulate. And the reason I think of these two movies is because I'm sure everyone has seen them, and they're both... Have you seen them?
I haven't. I'm a bit movie challenged, but I also wait until things come out on DVD because I can't stand the rude manners in movie theaters today.
Well, see, now there's a subject all on its own.
I know. I wanted to ask you about that at some point.
If we lived in a better culture, you would not have to have warnings up on the screen not to talk out loud, not to throw your hot dogs all over the place. And you wouldn't have to be told things like that. If we lived in a more refined, reasonable culture with more civility, people wouldn't have to be reminded of that because they would have been taught that
exactly
from their very first days, and it would be automatic to be considerate of other people.
It would be self-evident, exactly.
It would seem self-evident,
yeah,
because they would have been taught. But as far as your first question is concerned, taking those two movies, they're very good examples because they both are good and bad. And parents could easily, and I think they should, see movies with their children, watch TV with their children, read books with their children, go to museums with their children, and talk about these things. Talk about the values that they're seeing in the movies. For example, in Gladiator, you can talk about the fact that the gladiator is a heroic man. But there are flaws, value-wise, throughout that movie. And you can say when, for example, he sees his wife and child hanging and the wife having been flayed, do we really want to see him throw up, or would it be better to watch him feel the loss of his greatest values? And on the Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger, it's an enormously interesting movie because it deals with honor, it deals with maturity and youth, it deals with skills, it deals with integrity, but it is also flawed value-wise. So almost every movie you can see, if you go as an adult, and most adults are so undeveloped today that they better learn along with their children, actually.
True.
But these kinds of experiences can be very developmental if they're approached not as, oh, well, let's just go out and hang out for the evening, but let's go out and explore something together.
So it takes an active mind to fully enjoy a movie. You have to be able to evaluate a movie.
Absolutely. And by evaluating it, you then learn to start questioning and judging values. And when you learn to judge and question values of others, then you will learn how to introspect and question and judge your own values. So rather than being just pure entertainment, which is valid, these mass media presentations can also be enormous learning tools and enjoyable.
Does a movie, to be a good movie, have to be a serious movie? Or can it be, you mentioned it's okay for it to be entertaining. Can you talk more about that distinction there?
Well, I'm trying to think of a comedy offhand, which I can't do right now because I haven't. Movies are so bad that I go to most of them as an intellectual task because I feel it's my responsibility to know what's out there. But it's a rather dismal task usually. But let's just take a comedy in general. Comedies can also be very educational because what do we make fun of? What's funny?
Right.
And most, I want to say serious comedies, but most really good comedies have a serious core.
Because of the subject they're making fun of.
Exactly. So you can go for something that really seems slapsticky and silly, but then if you sit down afterward and say, well, now, what really went on here? Why was it funny? Why did I laugh?
Exactly.
And if you learn why you laughed at something, you will then learn what values you hold so that was funny and not sad.
This isn't a movie, it's a television show, but I don't know if you've ever seen Frasier on television.
I am sorry to admit, I am not proud of this fact, but I have never watched television even since I was a child.
Well, we talked about that.
I'm just not knowledgeable about TV.
You might want to try Frasier sometime because I have found it to be an intelligent comedy. The character is a psychiatrist and they get into all kinds of psychological issues, but in a very light, funny way, and it's often very, very good. That's what I think of as you talk. I'm hard-pressed to come up with a movie either that addresses anything. There's this popular series of films along the lines of The Cable Guy and that sort of thing. I actually haven't seen that, but it just Dumb and Dumber. I mean, just the title's enough to make me run screaming. I don't know. Have you seen any of those?
No, I haven't. But one thing I think could be extremely valuable is for families to watch old movies.
Now, what is...
Because there were wonderful movies before my time and before yours.
What's better about the older ones, do you think?
Well, they're more mature. They're not just, they have more care into what went into them. The writers today are basically interested in nonstop distraction, sensationalism, silliness, and cruelty clothed in silliness, whereas some of the older movies dealt with issues that could really be serious and then made them funny.
Do you think that people want better types of movies than what we're being offered today, or do you think that the movie houses are putting out what they're putting out because that's what sells?
Well, I think that is a downward spiral. I think that movie people make, and this is to their discredit, things that will appeal to the lowest common denominator in order to get the highest dollar. And what happens when you have a culture watching those kinds of movies, they then become used to that, they become lazy, they become passive, and then they want more of the same. So then the movie makers make a lower level, and it all keeps going downward.
But now,
so it feeds on each other, I think.
Right, so it's like a vicious circle.
I'm afraid so.
Potentially, people might go for a better movie, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Gladiator. At least, whatever flaws they have, they're dealing with values.
Yes,
human life.
That's the real key. And in fact, I think that that's why those two movies became so popular.
There's still a hunger, even today, with all the mediocrity and everything else, there's still a hunger for value-oriented movies.
There has to be a hunger because it's built into our nature.
Right. That's what you talk about in your book. It's not just a matter of opinion. This is objectively, we have a need to refuel ourselves by experiencing art or movies or television or whatever it is in this way.
We need to experience them, we need the fuel, but we also need to test ourselves. And these are ways that we can do it, especially children are always testing themselves or testing the world and adults for limits.
Boy, is that ever true.
So when you have a culture, as we do, where there are no standards of behavior, then you have no limits whatsoever. And that's why the country is full of demanding, obnoxious, disobedient, and aggressive children.
Do you think what we see around us in our society today isn't so much an immoral society so much as an amoral society, one that just has given up on morals and values altogether because it's politically incorrect to even talk about such a thing?
Yes, and in fact, an amoral society is worse than an immoral society.
It really is in a certain sense.
Yes, because if you have, our problem today is there's lack of authority anywhere. And even if the authority is wrong, it gives people something to hit against in the sense that they can say, that's wrong. I rebel against that, that's wrong. But there is at least something there to rebel against. And when you get in a situation where we are today, where you have no authority by parents or teachers, then you get into anarchy, which is where we are. And the moment you move into anarchy, then the next step is real authority in the form of tyranny, because people at that point don't care what law and order is, they just want some.
Exactly. And you know, a good cultural illustration of what you just said, we're getting off of movies now, but that's okay. Dr. Laura, she's not a political figure, but look at how great numbers of people crave someone like her because she offers seemingly absolutes and directives, but she's often doing it in the context of just do what I'm saying and shut up, do your duty. And of course she brings in religion too, fundamentalist religion.
I tell you, I feel very emotional about what you just said because I think that woman does so much harm, it's terrible. But the good part, because of what you just said, she's very dogmatic and she's not a good thinker.
Right. It's basically she's implying, I'll do your thinking for you, just do what I say and shut up.
Yes,
and people are craving that because of all the subjectivism and the lack of any standards.
That's right. She's a rule-bound person,
right,
rather than a guidebook, which is what a psychologist should be.
Right.
And it hurts me. I have heard her on the radio when I'm in the car, and it has gotten to the point where I simply cannot listen because it hurts me so deeply to listen to these callers who are so serious and so wanting to do the right thing.
Right.
And looking desperately for help.
That's exactly it.
And I'm so sorry that they can't find better guides than this woman. But the need is so serious in our culture. People are lost because there are no value leaders. I mean, there aren't some of them. I hope you and I are some. But I mean, in general, in the mass media, it's very difficult.
You're right. Now, let's go back for a minute to younger people. What do you think of this phenomenon of so-called rap music? And I know your favorite rap star is Eminem.
Yes. Oh, that's
you might want to share with our listeners your little story about
that.
That's very
funny. I was doing a radio show whenever that all came about, and I was not aware of it, and the radio host said, well, what do you think about this Eminem business? And all in the world I could think of was the candy. So I sort of sidestepped the question and danced around for a moment until he clarified his question a little better, And then I got the gist of what it was all about, and I was able to answer once again obliquely, but somewhat directly to the question. It was very funny.
I take it it's...
He never knew, by the way, that I was thrown for a moment.
Right. Well, that's a credit to you.
But from my point of view, I was giggling because I said, oh, my goodness, what is going to happen here?
Is this rap music just atonal nonsense? I mean, are we just being fuddy-duddies here? But how do you, because I'm a therapist, as you know, and a lot of the kids that I see are into this and listening to this.
Well, I don't consider rap music.
I don't either.
I would call it more street rhyme to a beat, because whatever musical component it may have is really not important. What's important is the street rhyme and the beat. Those are the two things that are most operative in that type of presentation.
I've never heard that definition before, but that's very well put. Now, let me ask you this. What psychologically would be going on within a young person that this beat would appeal to them as opposed to music, be it rock music or classical music or anything? What is going on in their mind psychologically, do you think?
Well, that's the whole point of it. Nothing's going on. The beat, the rock beat, is basically designed to assault reason. And that whole tribal history is to get people into, in some regard, a trance. And that's what that beat, that's why they like the beat. You will find that people who love to use their minds go crazy listening to it. But people who are lazy with their minds and who want to sort of veg out mentally love it because it arrests thought. So you don't have to think. And in fact, you can't think. So its appeal is that it lets you sort of take a mental vacation.
Why would so many kids not want to think? What's going on there? I wanted to think growing up. I'm sure you wanted to think growing up. Even today, some kids still want to think, but the trend is so much in the other direction. What do you think's going on there?
I think it's basically laziness, and one of the problems, too, is that, we start listening in the womb at 4.5 months. So children born today hear that music before they're even born. And I'm not stating this as a definitive conclusion, but merely as a hypothesis that when children are born into a world where that's all they hear, it really may affect their hardwiring.
That's interesting. I never thought of that before. What about the school systems, and what about just what they're learning in school or not learning in school? Do you think that there's changes over the decades in the way kids are being taught to think or not think, as the case may be?
Well, many changes, and largely for the same reason that they're not taught anything at home. And that is because both teachers and parents have not developed themselves. So virtually huge proportions of the adult population is not fit to teach children because they aren't fit to be adults yet. And I think the only way to cure this is to have a private school system.
Well, that would certainly help.
If you did, then parents would have to think about where to send their children, and the schools would have to compete with ideas, curricula, and teachers, and it might start making people stop to think. Children, I know some young teachers, and they are good young teachers, completely frustrated in their schools because they are not permitted to discipline in any regard whatsoever. And if a child acts up, they're sent to the school nurse.
Exactly.
To get some drugs to calm them down. And I know one young teacher who has a 14-year-old who masturbates regularly in her class.
In the class?
Yes. And she has brought it up to the teachers' meetings and has been instructed to ignore it. She is not even permitted to tell the parents.
Well, there's a new politically correct
So you see how
anecdote.
it's so bad that the young teachers, or any teacher really, who does have some values and wants to help her students, is being thwarted by the political correctness of the schools. Therefore, once again, the spiral goes down instead of up.
Okay.
Because you're not strengthening those students. The lost students are important, but they're not as important as the found students. Because if you take a child, whether it be your own or a student, and you strengthen the strongest of them, that will begin to raise the level of the culture.
We're going to take a short break here. Alexandra York, author of From the Fountainhead to the Future, is our guest. The website where you can find out more about her book, her organization, is art-21.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Michael Hurd will be right back after this short break.
Are you tired of meddling politicians and self-appointed intellectuals who want to tell you what to do with your business, your health care, and your money? Take the first big step toward independence by subscribing now to the Living Resources newsletter, written by your host, Dr. Michael Hurd, and mailed to you 6 times a year. Get a free sample issue by calling 1-800-358-3606. That's 1-800-358-3606, toll-free. You can also order your free issue or subscribe online at www.drhurd.com. That's drhurd.com. Look closely at the people who tell you to sacrifice. Most often, they're the ones with their hands out waiting to collect. Learn to recognize the contradictions by calling 1-800-358-3606 now for your free introductory issue of the Living Resources newsletter. That's 1-800-358-3606 for the Living Resources newsletter, the modern toolkit for rational living.
Ask a 6th grader what a pipe is, and they'll say,
something that water goes through.
ask a 7th grader what a pipe is, and they'll say,
something that marijuana smoke goes through.
in 6th grade, about 1 in 13 kids have tried pot. By 7th, 1 in 5. What a difference a year makes. Be sure your kids know you don't want them to use drugs. A message from the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the Partnership for a Drug-Free America.
Would you like to hear answers to your questions right here on Solutions Not Excuses? Be a part of the show by calling 1-800-358-3606 extension 2 and record your question on voicemail for Dr. Hurd. Your question or comment may be edited for length and content and then broadcast here on the show, followed by Dr. Hurd's comments or advice. Any message you record for broadcast will become the exclusive property of Living Resources Incorporated. We request that you leave your name and phone number, but we will not use your name on the air. Due to the volume of calls we receive, we cannot guarantee that your message will be used. So get with the program and record your question or comment toll-free at 1-800-358-3606, extension 2. We'd love you to join us here on Solutions Not Excuses. Welcome back to Solutions Not Excuses with Dr. Michael Hurd.
Welcome back to the show. Alexandra York is our guest. She is the author of From the Fountainhead to the Future and other essays on art and excellence. We're in the middle of solving the problem of children today, right, Alexandra?
Well, we're trying.
We're trying. I understand you have a story you want to tell us to illustrate what we're talking about.
Yes, I do. This is the way I open my speech, The Fourth Hour in Education, Reading, Writing, Arithmetic, and Art.
Which is in your book.
Which is in the book. And we were talking about strengthening the best and dealing with children one at a time. I'm very concerned about groupthink, and I think it is extremely dangerous to think in groups.
And I think it's a key to the school violence and a lot of other things, but go ahead.
Yes,
we'll get into
we
that.
must deal with individuals. So here is my story. Early one morning, a man was walking along a bluff overlooking the ocean when he noticed a barefoot woman walking along the beach, clearly engrossed in a strange activity. She was picking up starfish that had been washed ashore by the tide, and one by one throwing them back into the sea. Intrigued, he scrambled down the bank of the cliff and approached her. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm saving starfish," she answered, gently tossing another into the water. The man let his eyes drift over the endless shoreline in wonder, but he stammered, There are thousands of starfish stranded on this beach. You can't save them all. I know, the woman smiled. She picked up another starfish and returned it to the ocean. But I'm saving this one. She continued undaunted. And this one. And this one. Isn't that nice?
It's wonderful. And one thing I'm thinking as you relate the story is how different this is from our one-size-fits-all public school system. I've gone off about that before, I think with you when you were on before too. These gigantic schools that look to me like prisons, intellectual prisons, not because they're setting any kind of objective limits or responsibilities on kids, but just because of what they're often taught or not taught in them. And it's the lack of individualism that is the problem today, is part of your point, isn't it?
It is. And I love your idea of prison, but my first thought was, but what they're imprisoning is their bodies, because they're certainly not doing anything for their minds.
Exactly.
So they're sort of imprisoning their bodies and letting them atrophy, or they're teaching them bad values. I think one of the most important things for children, we hear so much about, self-esteem, we have to be so careful of their self-esteem and so on and so forth. But self-esteem for an individual comes not from peer acceptance, but by living rational values.
Exactly.
I mean, someone may not be liked, and children have to learn that they don't have to like everybody, and maybe I am not liked either.
Right, they don't have to be liked by everybody
Exactly.
either.
What is important is to be respected.
I think what happens is psychologically so often is that it's by default that kids go to feeling that they're not even conscious of it necessarily. They go to feeling that they have to be accepted by the group, but that's just a default of the fact that they haven't been taught how to use their minds and be rational individualists in pursuing their interest in art or having ambitions. It seems like there's such a lack of ambition in so many children today.
Well, one of the things people don't realize is that thinking is not automatic, and we have to be taught or teach ourselves how to think. This is the major, should be the major function of a school.
It's the process of thinking.
Exactly. Teach children how to think independently.
It's not
what we're doing is exactly the opposite.
Yeah, it's not just the content of the coursework or whatever, although obviously that's important, but it's the method that kids are being taught or not taught that's crucial. For instance, they can't just be taught to memorize facts. They have to be taught how to use their minds. If a school or an educational program isn't delivering that, then they are failing miserably, even if they can show to the government board or whatever, well, look, we have this textbook, we have that textbook, we're covering the basics, or we're covering the politically correct demanded things or whatever. It doesn't make any difference if they're not learning the process of reason, which connects back to our discussion of movies and young people too, doesn't it? Because did you see, Alexandra, the movie October Sky by chance?
I didn't. I've heard of it, and it's on my list, but I didn't see it.
See it. That's the kind of movie, I think you'll agree when you see it, that a young person needs to be exposed to. It's basically about the pursuit of value. This young man who is interested in rockets and space, and I won't go into the plot and give it away, but it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. But it is such an unbelievable exception I was sort of sad after I saw the movie, because as uplifting and wonderful as it was, I thought there's just so little of this out there.
Well, it's important that one. It is crucial, in fact, that one sees something one can look up to.
Exactly.
But even if the movie is bad, it still can be good if you think about it and talk about it and analyze it, which is the most important thing. And parents, I don't know, I live in both New York City and Pennsylvania, and actually Vermont as well. So I have an opportunity to witness a lot of young parents in urban and rural areas, in public places, high and low. And it is my observation. I mean, there's a baby boom going on, as you know, that's bigger than any baby boom after World War II. Mm-hmm. And the young parents seem to feel that they have achieved something by just having offspring. Well, rabbits do it every day. This is not an achievement per se. And I watch infants from 6 months old to children 15 years old manipulate their parents every day of my life.
Absolutely.
And we are living in an age of child worship, and this is one of the reasons, and one of the things that these parents, by the way, if I may say so, are teaching their children. They're helping them to become neurotics. But the worst thing they're teaching them is by letting the children manipulate them and demand and tell the parents what's going on. And the same in the schools. We should not let children tell us what they want to learn. We tell them what to learn.
Right.
And the worst thing they're teaching children is that they can manipulate reality. And the day will come when these children will be of a certain age in adulthood where it will confront them. Whether it ever dawns on them or not is a different issue. But reality will confront them. And other people will confront them. And they won't know how to deal with those things because they're so used to manipulating. It's very scary.
It is. And, it's interesting because in the 15 years or so I've been doing family therapy, if it were 10 years ago, I would be saying to you that a lot of parents don't want to hold their kids accountable, even in a rational kind of way, because they're afraid it'll hurt their kids' self-esteem. But what I'm seeing today isn't even that so much anymore. What I see more and more of today, and it's really discouraging to say the least, is parents coming in with their kids who are out of control, and they're letting the kids manipulate them, like you say, and I'm trying to introduce them to the idea of holding their kids accountable to reality, not just to some arbitrary authority. And there's this terrible resentment from the parents that seems to stem from an idea that they shouldn't have to do this, that someone else should be doing it. It's almost like they're outraged that they've given their kids no guidance or no values of any kind, and then they're outraged that they've turned into monsters who aren't self-responsible.
I would suggest that the parents probably have the same problem as the child.
Yeah, it's like teenagers raising teenagers.
Exactly.
That's what I'm seeing more and more as the norm. 10 years ago I would have said, well, there's an occasional case like that, and that is really discouraging to me. That is really frightening to me because, granted, I'm a therapist and I'm seeing a more negative slant on the population than hopefully is there, but it's still, something is really rotten somewhere. Something is rotten to the core. But I don't
it's lack of values.
Right, it's lack of values. But I don't want to get too negative because I know in your book, of course, maybe you become more negative since the book, I don't know. But you write about, let's see, I can't find the exact quote here, but you talk in the book, don't you, about some indications. Well, it sounds like you're saying basically we're hitting bottom, but there's also some faint indications that there is sort of a rebirth of romance and values taking place, whether we're talking about art, movies, or just the culture in general.
Well, I'm very optimistic.
You really are.
Just because I get worried and I never get discouraged. I get frustrated, but I never get discouraged because I believe to my core that any time of crisis is a time of opportunity. And I think that it can be used as a springboard, like Phoenix rising out of the ashes of its own funeral pyre. I think that all crises can be used as great springboards to move forward. And since we have a situation, as you just described in your own practice, of parents who really are not developed themselves, then my positive program for that would be for parents and children to learn together. For example, something as, there has to be a blueprint. You have to have a plan if you're going to get out of a mess. And something as simple as, say, once a week the family has to spend an evening together. Now, this is required. And on that evening, maybe they look through an art book, maybe they see a movie, maybe they listen to music, maybe they watch something on television, and then they all talk about the values involved together. And if the parents are underdeveloped themselves, they can explore and learn along with their children. If they don't have much to offer already in their own development, at least it gives a core to the family where they can all explore and learn together. Now, I think that's a positive thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, we need to take another quick break here, but stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Alexandra York, author of From the Fountainhead to the Future. Stay with us.
Dr. Michael Hurd will be right back after this short break.
Therapy might not be for everyone, but good mental health is. If you like what you hear on Solutions, Not Excuses, get a free sample issue of Dr. Hurd's own publication, The Living Resources Newsletter, with no obligation by calling toll-free 1-800-358-3606. You may also visit www.drhurd.com. That's drhurd.com to get your free sample issue or to subscribe to the Living Resources Newsletter. Stop depending on bumbling politicians and self-appointed experts to tell you what doctor you can or cannot see for your health care, or how much of your hard-earned money they will let you keep at the end of the year. Treat yourself to the happy, responsible life by calling 1-800-358-3606. That's 1-800-358-3606 for your free issue of the Living Resources Newsletter, the modern toolkit for rational living.
What do the public schools, most mental health professionals, politicians, religious leaders, and the liberal media have in common? None of them want you to read Dr. Michael Hurd's latest book, Grow Up America. Find out why public schools are beyond reform, no matter how much of your tax money is thrown at them. Learn how self-esteem is achieved by competence, not compassion. Find out why attention deficit disorder is a self-serving con game for psychiatrists and schools alike. Grow Up America tackles everyday life from a provocative and ruthlessly honest point of view. If you're ready to live the happy, responsible life, you'll find Grow Up America at your favorite bookstore or from Amazon.com. For more details, visit www.lrpress.com. America, it's time to grow up.
Welcome back to Solutions, Not Excuses with Dr. Michael Hurd.
Welcome back. We're having an absolutely fascinating discussion here with Alexandra York, author of the excellent book, which I highly recommend to listeners to not only read, but reread and reread again and again. From the Fountainhead to the Future and other essays on art and excellence. The website is art-21.org. And Alexandra, we were talking before the break about a very important point, because I get this question all the time, and you probably do too from readers of your book and visitors to your website, about how can somebody who really is rational and value-oriented and romantic and so forth, the things that you and I are, how can they cope in today's culture? But your point is that in every crisis, and I know this and say this all the time as a therapist too, in every crisis there's opportunity, and you walk through a very good example. By the way, it's the kind of thing I recommend to families when they come to see me as to how they can get on a better track, and how the parents, if the parents don't know what they're doing, they can learn with the kids, and that's okay, because it's better that they both learn than they just continue to wallow around in their ignorance.
Yes, and the first lesson to be learned is to be self-generated.
Explain that.
If one doesn't set about with a plan, as we were just talking about, oh, incidentally, can I just correct the website? It's art-21.
Oh, okay.
Hyphen rather than dash. When I mean self-generated is that we all have free will. Children have free will too, and I think a lot of people forget that. So we have to teach ourselves to want to explore. We have to say, I will explore.
Exactly.
I want to explore. One doesn't just wake up one morning exploring. That's why I said one has to have a plan. Take one step at a time. And the first step is, I want to learn. I want to learn what? Well, I want to learn what's right and what's wrong. I want to learn what's good and what's bad. I want to learn what's beautiful and what's ugly. And start your list. What do you want to learn?
And then
learn those things first.
Yes. And this ties in nicely with the wonderful Aristotle quotes you have in your book. At one point, you quote Aristotle, who wrote that happiness is active, not something you simply receive. And that's something I say all the time. The higher the exercise capabilities, he wrote, the more happiness there will be. He also wrote, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
Yes.
This man,
you
thousands of years
ago. My
ago.
favorite. Well, since I was 17, Aristotle was my great idea hero. And most people, I'm so glad you brought this up, most people simply do not understand what true deep happiness is.
They don't.
And one of the reasons you have children who are so awful is because the higher your capacity capacity. If you don't fulfill that capacity, some part of you always knows it. And you are unhappy because human beings have a nature, and our nature is to find joy in ourselves.
Yeah.
And Aristotle says the happiness comes from the act of rising to your highest capacities.
And when we kill...
It doesn't come from your second or third car.
And if you think about it, exactly, if you think about it, when we kill or we weaken a child's capacity to reason and to think and to really fully value, then what happens? They're more likely to turn to drugs. They're more likely to turn to violence in the extreme cases. Talk for a moment about the school violence. How does that tie into all of this?
Well, I think that has to do a lot with lack of personal identity. Well, we have an identity crisis in the whole country. We have a national identity crisis. But to take it down to a youngster without an identity, without a personal identity, and what is an identity? An identity, I am who I am because I am the aggregate of all of my values. That's who I am. The sum of my values. Well, if you don't have any values,
exactly,
then you have no identity. If you don't have any identity, you seek identity in a pseudo way. So you do something absolutely outrageous in order that, I remember reading an interview with one of the policemen who handled one of the boys who killed some people in one of the schools, and he said, forget remorse. He said he was looking up at the helicopter in the sky that was filming him. He was looking at all the reporters. He was looking at the TV cameras. For that moment of publicity or notoriety, that child felt like he was somebody.
And that is the ultimate extreme, isn't it?
Yep.
Of having to get your identity, your personality validated by everybody else.
And found elsewhere rather than, as we said earlier, self-generated.
Exactly. That's got to be the most selfless act that could be imagined.
That's for sure.
Well, we're going to take another quick break here, but stay tuned and we'll be wrapping up with Alexandra York, author of From the Fountainhead to the Future. Stay with us.
Dr. Michael Hurd will be right back after this short break. Would you like to hear answers to your questions right here on Solutions Not Excuses? Be a part of the show by calling 1-800-358-3606 extension 2 and record your question on voicemail for Dr. Hurd. Your question or comment may be edited for length and content and then broadcast here on the show, followed by Dr. Hurd's comments or advice. Any message you record for broadcast will become the exclusive property of Living Resources Incorporated. We request that you leave your name and phone number, but we will not use your name on the air. Due to the volume of calls we receive, we cannot guarantee that your message will be used. So get with the program and record your question or comment toll-free at 1-800-358-3606 extension 2. We'd love you to join us here on Solutions Not Excuses.
This is the American Cancer Society Radio News Service.
One of the biggest issues and one of the concerns foremost in the minds of patients with cancer is pain and pain management. And it's a common complication of cancer, but in this day and age, it essentially can always be effectively managed.
That's Dr. Robert Young, who says the American Cancer Society, in collaboration with the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, recently produced guidelines which are
the translation of the scientific information on state-of-the-art pain management into lay terms so the public can understand what's available.
For a copy of the Cancer Pain Treatment Guidelines for Patients, call the American Cancer Society at 1-800-ACS-2345.
What do the public schools, most mental health professionals, politicians, religious leaders, and the liberal media have in common? None of them want you to read Dr. Michael Hurd's latest book, Grow Up America. Find out why public schools are beyond reform, no matter how much of your tax money is thrown at them. Learn how self-esteem is achieved by competence, not compassion. Find out why attention deficit disorder is a self-serving con game for psychiatrists and schools alike. Grow Up America tackles everyday life from a provocative and ruthlessly honest point of view. If you're ready to live the happy, responsible life, you'll find Grow Up America at your favorite bookstore or from Amazon.com. For more details, visit www.lrpress.com. America, it's time to grow up.
Welcome back to Solutions Not Excuses with Dr. Michael Hurd.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion here with Alexandra York, author of From the Fountainhead to the Future. And the website is art-21.org. Did I get it right?
You did.
Okay, and I've got it right here in front of me. And I was really intrigued because I hadn't visited in a little while, maybe a few months, and I noticed this Temple of Triumph project, which here we're talking about the positive. I was really excited about that. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Very quickly, this is a temple built, which will be built, hopefully, to the heroic spirit in man. And it involves architecture, sculpture, poetry, and music. And the temple will be historical in the sense that there's never been anything like it, because it is a secular temple in the sense that it is humanistic, but it will be all-inclusive of all religions, because every religion, no matter what it is, does deal with the best in man. Whether they're correct in what they think is best in man is not the issue here, but it is that all people strive or want to strive for the highest. So it will be an experience of self-celebration for people of every walk of life.
Well, talk about refueling. This is a fantastic project, and you raise another provocative and interesting point, because I know you and I agree, neither you nor I are religious or supernatural in any way, but we both would decry the lack of religion broadly defined in our society. Religion meaning the best in man, not necessarily a supernatural entity, but the best that human life has to offer, because in today's cynical, hard-edged age, there is none of that. Now, Dr. Laura would say, go to church, that's the solution. That isn't the solution.
But we say, find your own spirituality. It's not that we're necessarily religious, but we're highly spiritual people. One does not have to be religious to be spiritual.
Right. Now, how do you define spiritual? Because a lot of subjectivists use that term, too, just to mean anything and everything.
I have a definition in the book if I can find it quickly.
Well, that's better than I expected.
Yeah, but I have to be able to find it quickly, don't I?
Well,
here it is. Got it.
Great.
Okay. My own definition of secular spirituality rooted thoroughly in Aristotelian naturalism for our present purposes as follows. A heightened state of being, a psychosensory experience of unity with one's own fundamental values in response to a physical entity embodying them, such as nature, art, or another person, which results from a process of mind-body integration.
That's key.
Now, that's the opening of another show, isn't it?
It sure is. But people, and many will be listening here online, and they can go right to your website and get this picture of, I think it is a photograph of this Temple of Triumph under construction, or is this an artist's rendering? It's so nice, I can't tell.
It's a rendering.
Okay, good.
I wish it were under construction, but we do have a site in mind.
You do have a site off the coast of San Francisco, no less. What a spectacular site.
Yes, it's just unbelievable. It's a very exciting project and one I intend to complete.
Well, people can go to your website not only to find out about the temple, but also just to see some works of art and just get a concrete positives of what we've been talking about here.
They can also read some of the essays free.
Yeah, but I recommend getting the whole book, too.
That's good.
Get off a buck or two. It's well worth it. Alexandra, you've been fantastic. I hope you'll come back again sometime. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a true pleasure.
I wish everyone a wonderful week. And as always, work productively, live happily, live romantically, and most of all, don't feel guilty for it.
Thank you for joining us today for Solutions Not Excuses with Dr. Michael Hurd. To get your free issue or to subscribe to the Living Resources newsletter, visit Dr. Hurd's website at www.drhurd.com. That's DRHURD.com, or call 1-800-358-3606. The toll-free number again is 1-800-358-3606.